then the body and the mind will be pleased with the lighting. So if we just shortly imagine that we are traveling to Central Africa and we are living in this area here, you know the sunrise in Africa is just, the sun is up and poof, it's down. And when the sun sets below the horizon, it takes approximately 20 minutes before it's pitch black in Africa. And isn't it a strange coincidence that it takes us around 20 minutes to dark adapt? So if we leave a lit room, goes into a dark area, it takes us around 20 minutes before our eyesight, our retina is totally dark adapted. It's exactly the same time as it takes in Africa before the sun sets and everything gets dark. And the other way, in the morning, as soon as the sun just pops above the horizon, the brightness level just raises very fast. And you know, we bright adapt approximately in 30 seconds. So if we leave from a very dark place to a very bright place, our retina is much, much faster in adapting to these kind of changes. So actually, when we just think about how the lighting is, the light levels, the directions, the colors, the compositions of light, if we want to make lights for humans, we have to adapt some of the light settings that we find in Central Africa. Well, we stayed there for a very, very long time, and after around 50,000 years ago, we started to go up along the Nile here, and then leave Africa through this junction with the rest of the world. And around 50,000 human beings left, 20,000 human beings left around 50,000 years ago. And they colonized the rest of the world. So imagine that these 20,000 people became 7 million in 50,000 years. So that means we're actually all related to each other. We are a very close family. We know each other, and our genome is pretty close, and we're really close to each other, all of us. So on this travel around or leaving this Central Africa up through the Nile, somebody stayed back up here in the upper part, or the lower part of the Nile as they call it, and founded the first civilizations, as in they built the pyramids in Egypt. And everybody knew at that time instinctively that the sun was good for us. So it was natural for people all over the world to start worshipping the sun. And the most powerful gods you always found in any religion was the sun gods. In Egypt, it was the sun god of Ra, and if you go to other religions, they also worshiped the sun at that time. Because they just knew that the sun, without the sun, we wouldn't have any lives. We wouldn't be alive at all, and we wouldn't be healthy. So if we take along this route and move away from Egypt, we move to some of the first civilizations, real big civilizations in Rome. And the layout in Rome was quite amazing, because when the architects built Rome, there was a legal that everybody had the right to sunlight. You were not allowed to build a house so that you could not get sunlight into the neighbor's house. So imagine when you laid out a very big city like Rome, they had to spread it, they have to have open squares, they have to have wide roads to get the sunlight in. Not just daylight, but actually sunlight. So the Romans were the first to make legislation about having a right to sunlight. Imagine a city this size, and what an amount of work they must have been doing in planning that there would be daylight or sunlight everywhere. So, well, from the first million years up to civilization, everything went relatively smooth. And then we come up in the end of the 18th centuries, where we started to talk about the Industrial Revolution. And the Industrial Revolution is very often pictured by something of pictures from England. And when you look at these artists from that time, when they draw a picture or make a painting of their time, it's very, very dark. And actually, it's pretty accurate, because there's always a train sort of simulating the Industrial Revolution, and there are chimneys all over the place pouring black smoke up, and it must have been really, really black at that time in London. So looking at pictures like that, it seemed that actually coal dust just covered the skies, and it also fell down and covered parts of the earth. So it must have been pretty dark to be living in London at that time. Typical places for the industrial worker was small cottages or small houses like this. And again, you see the steam train in the back with pouring out with the black smoke, and a lot of chimneys all over the place. And these settings were actually where people lived. So during the day, people may have worked in the mines, they may have worked in factories, working indoor, and as soon as they got home, they would move into their houses and have only a little access to daylight. Probably no sunlight at all. And the windows about here, in that time in the UK, people paid taxes according to the size of the window. So it was called window taxing. So if you were a poor person, you could break up your window and then you didn't have to pay any tax. So a lot of poor people just closed the windows and didn't have to pay taxes. And if you talk to some British people, they still use this term daylight robbery. And that's actually what the state did to the working class in the UK at that time in the ending of the 18th centuries, that they took away the last piece of daylight they had. And that started to cause rickets in a real epidemic all over England. And rickets is caused by D vitamin, lack of D vitamins in the mother and the father, and the children they produce get soft bones that are sort of bent in every direction. And this picture is one of the more nicest pictures I could find, because there are really some nasty examples of where the skeleton is just turned soft. And at that time, nobody had any idea about D vitamin or any sort of could connect it with lack of D vitamins. But then some people started wondering, why are our children all of a sudden starting to be born with these kind of defects? And then they started to think about their crone colonies in India, and they said, nope, none of the children born in India looks like that. They're all healthy. They may have other problems, but at that time they were at least healthy in another way. And then people start to wonder, is it really because the people of India are living in an intense sunlight and they wear relatively little clothes, so they're exposed to sunlight in quite a different way? And then people started to add these things together, that if we could expose people to sunlight, we would probably cure rickets. And that's exactly what happened. Inspired by the Indians, people started to expose their children to sunlight. And that sort of kicked off the connection about heliotherapy in the modern ages, which is just the beginning of the 1900s. These pictures are from 1903, and if you had tuberculosis at that time, there were no cure. If you got diagnosed with tuberculosis, the people around you started to say goodbye, because you would most likely die of it. So rich people had the possibility to send off their children or themselves to hospitals which was placed in the Alps above 2,000 meters in the mountains, where they have a relatively high amount of UVB radiation in the daylight. And these doctors, they worked extremely professional with this doesn't really work. So it works extremely professional with the dosing of these things. So the children were sort of pushed into the bedrooms at night and then dragged out into the sun, being exposed maybe for 15 or 18 minutes with part of the body covered and other parts naked, so that they could control the dosage very precisely. And people started to survive the tuberculosis epidemic. In 1903, this guy in the middle here, he got a lot of money, because he was starting to really be famous, because he was putting this into a very strict system where he covered up body parts and exposed people again, and and made sort of like the recipe or the cure for people having tuberculosis. There was a especially nasty form of tuberculosis where it is the inside of the stomach, where you have the space between the outer part of your body and the inside of the stomach is being infected. And if you had that, you would die within a relatively short time. So this guy, he asked for volunteers, and he had this idea that if he cut open the skin and you just opened it like that, then the sun would radiate on the inner part of the body, and then you sewed it together again. And he got 273 volunteers, and 170 of these people survived. And that just made headlines all over the world, that the sunlight really cured this kind of disease. At that time, they did not know if it was the heat from the sun, the visible sunlight, or if it was UV radiation. Research told us that we have the different